My name is Deepesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global. The need for trade digitization has never been more prevalent than it is today. It deserves the attention it's been getting in the media, owing to the restriction of people and goods from the pandemic, as well as the realization that paper-based trade finance is inefficient, expensive, and risky. But is interoperability the holy grail, a magical answer for trade digitization in a post-COVID world? And can one magical company solve all of the complex problems we have in this heavily siloed sector? Today, we're discussing how fintechs can come together to partner to solve these problems. And we're debunking some of the commonly discussed myths around trade digitization. And we're coming to terms with what standardization can do to help accelerate this. So today, I'm joined by Contour's Carl Wegner and Josh Croker, and Daniel Wilson, who's joining us from New York. Welcome to this Fireside Chat.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
So, elevator pitch, let's get started. I'm going to ask you in no more than 30 seconds to describe who you are, where you're from, and what you do. So, Carl, let's start with you.
Thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Carl Wegner, CEO of Contour. I've been on this digital trade journey, well, for a long time. So I sort of say I've been doing fintech for about 35, 37 years. So about 25 years of fin. I've been at banks, Bank of Boston, Standard Chartered Bank a few times. My last job was at Deutsche Bank running transaction banking in China. And then I've been at 3 startups. I left banking once for this new technology called the internet in 2000, helped GT Nexus set up at that time in Asia, left again banking in 2016 for this technology called blockchain and helped set up R3 in Asia. And that brought me into the project, which later became financed and set up as Contour. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. And Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Deepesh. So I've been spending my career trying to help businesses get access to corporate finance. So I spent most of my career in the banking side. I won't say the number of years, a little bit less than Carl, both in Canada and Hong Kong. And the latter part of that career has really been focusing on transaction-based finance or trade finance. And how can we give that to people in a more digital, more inclusive, more approachable way? And I think what I was trying to do in a single bank, I think hasn't worked. And I think the industry has realized that. So then what I started looking at is how collaboration and new technologies could actually drive digitization and drive inclusiveness for transaction-based finance. And that brings us to today. After many years of experimenting with different technologies, we've landed on Contour as a great marriage of technology as well as industry collaboration to take us to that future, as well as with partners with TradeLens and Daniel.
Thanks, Josh. And Daniel, over to you. And I'm also going to ask why the Jurassic Park mug?
Thank you very much, Deepesh. This is partly because it's a little after 8 a.m. here in New York, and partly I was a big fan of the movies when I was a kid. It's also somewhat representative of the state of digitization in our industry, I think, but that one is entirely coincidental. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Wilson. I look after strategy and operations for the TradeLens platform. TradeLens is the result of a collaboration between Maersk and IBM. I come from the Maersk side of the collaboration. I've been with the company about 7 years, but been on TradeLens a little over 4 years now. What we're trying to do with TradeLens is pretty simple. You have the operational, the financial, and the commercial flows that are involved in trade today. We particularly or initially focus on that operational side, but really we want to be able to connect to bringing all of those parts of trade together so that those who are involved with trade can collaborate with their supply chain partners, get greater efficiencies, and really just make their supply chains more resilient and easier to manage. And that's what TradeLens is looking to do. But this is not something we think that can be done alone. And that's why we're joining this conversation here today, because we think there's incredible opportunities that come as a result of collaboration within our industry.
Thanks. And I think that's a key topic as part of today's discussion. But we'll start off with a bit of an overview of Contour. And perhaps, Josh, can I ask you to give a quick overview of Contour and what services you offer?
Sure, absolutely. So I think I sort of alluded to it a little bit in my intro, but Contour has come out of industry collaboration. In this case, the industry that we're talking about is banks and trade finance banks in particular, who decided to work together to build a common solution, a common network that can bring together for the first time banks and corporates on a common network for trade finance activities. Now, there's many trade finance activities that corporates do with each other, that corporates do with banks, and that banks do with each other. So we had to choose where we were going to start. We ended up starting with letters of credit. We decided that because letters of credit is a globally important product. It adds a lot to the trade finance world in terms of risk mitigation, helping people get access to finance, as well as the common data standard and a process standard. But most importantly, nobody likes using letters of credit. It has a lot of room for improvement in terms of its process. And we think that by digitizing and bringing everyone together onto a common platform, we've been able to deliver a lot of those benefits. From there, we're only going to grow to other areas and future innovations, but that's been the core of Contour, building that global network and allowing these products to be delivered in a much more efficient way, again, with the help of partners as well.
No, absolutely. And I guess letters of credit, one of the oldest documentary instruments that trade really has seen. How are Contour and TradeLens actually working together to collaborate?
Sure. Well, we don't want to live in a vacuum when we're looking at digitization, as you sort of mentioned in your intro, right? There's so many different parts to trade. If we're focusing on trade finance, that might be steps, 30 to 60 in a 100-step process. So what we want to know is what happens before that trade finance process, what happens during, and then what happens after. Now, what we know is a very important part of trade is the physical movement of goods. What's even more important than the actual physical movement of goods is the title transfer related to those goods. So things like electronic bills of lading, where someone who's shipping something can get access to the title to those goods and send it through their trusted banks to the end buyer as part of a letter of credit process, is absolutely essential to digitization. And TradeLens is this great opportunity to work together because of their, of course, part ownership in Maersk, as well as their growing network in the shipping space to provide that collaboration.
Okay, thanks very much. I guess that kind of answers the question around the partnership. Daniel, can you talk a little bit more about TradeLens and how that partnership kind of comes together?
Yeah, this story is not too dissimilar to what Josh is talking about. So he's got the banks who are coming together. We have the carriers, ports and terminals, customs, that operational side of TradeLens coming together. We have 2/3 of the global container market on the platform, hundreds of ports and terminals, over a dozen customs authorities, a growing inland network, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that we can bring all of these participants together and get those steps, maybe at steps 15 to 30 and then steps 60 to 75, to use Josh's analogy there. It's really bringing that entire journey into a shared digital space. And Josh is right. The letter of credit is one of the oldest instruments used in trade, but the oldest is this bill of lading that Josh also referred to there. And digitizing that document, this hundreds of year old document, into something that's easier to send than an email is essential for us to drive for this true vision of paperless trade here. So it's a really exciting time to be in our industry.
Thanks, Daniel, and good to discuss the complementarity between the two platforms. So let's start with a few misconceptions. I think we've had a few conversations about this before versus what's actually happening in the industry. Carl, can platforms such as Contour and say Comgo or Marco Polo, etc., ever be truly interoperable?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And this goes back to, I first started at R3 and there were talk about Corda being R3's Corda and Hyperledger and Ethereum. And, can all these blockchain systems be interoperable? Well, and we're not going to start till they're all interoperable. Well, the first thing is interoperable doing what, right? First, you have to have a product, a reason to be interoperable. You don't build it just for the sake of building it. There has to be a business reason, right? So interoperability is thrown out, but it's not very simple. I think if you're looking at so blockchain systems being interoperable, that's in the future, right? I think the way that interoperability is going to be first between blockchain systems is through APIs, right? And that works fine. Eventually we get structured data and all blockchainified data in the future. That'll be great. But right now APIs work fine. Now, if you're talking about different ecosystems, they may not also be interoperable, right? It's not because of blockchain. It's because they have different business networks, right? And it's going to have to be, customers are going to be choosing, which system helps them connect with more. But, and the way that I sort of talk about our partnerships, and we're talking to over probably about 150 different partners right now from a Contour perspective, really only active with about 20, 25 at the moment. And the way we evaluate that interoperability, that partnership, is if, say, we have 100 fields that we're managing in a letter of credit, and Josh was saying, and there's a company that manages maybe 70 fields, but they're overlap of 20 fields. Well, those 20 fields are information that our customers, whether it be banks or corporates, want us to sync, right? They don't want to retype that in, right? Data inheritance, it's keyed in once, don't key it in again. They want us to sync that. So there's a business reason to connect. That's a wonderful partner to work with, right? Where you have some data that's overlapped, you can work through APIs to pull it together. If you have a partner, some people say, I want to partner with you, and you look at, and they have zero overlapping data, then there's really nothing to partner with, right? What's the point? And there's a lot of people say, I want to join with you, but help me. Well, if you don't have data, there's nothing to connect. Now, if you have a system where it's, 80, 90% overlap of the same data, then obviously that's going to be a competitor, right? And I think in the world, as we move on, there's not going to be winner take all. Absolutely not. It's partnerships that are going to make this happen. And it's partnerships where customers say, I would like A company and B company, please connect because I'm using both of you, right? You're live, you're in production, and I want you to connect to help that data move smoothly between the systems. And so interoperability among competitors, no, probably not going to happen, right? But where there's an overlap of data where that can help the customer's journey be smoother, absolutely. And that's a key thing to our partnership.
Oh, can I just go into that in a little bit more detail? What kind of partnerships then would you see as complementary versus competitive? Can you give a few examples?
Well, again, we're in the trade finance space, right? And here's TradeLens over here. I mean, they're in the operational, the bill of lading space, right? They're different people make decisions, and there's a lot of companies, over the years, especially blockchain. Oh, we manage all of trade finance. Well, really, I mean, all trade. What does that mean? Well, all of trade finance for shipping. Well, that's not all of trade finance, right? Or all of trade, right? Shipping is a specific category, specific data fields, and a specific understanding, right? That's very different. Container booking is very different than booking your letter of credit and getting your line of credit ready to negotiate a LC or get financing. So it's where it's complementary is where there's overlap, right? But each area has, different level of expertise, and it could be shipping, it could be ESG, it could be, there's a lot of different components in trade finance, not related, in trade, right? Global trade. Let's not say trade finance, global trade. There's a lot of different components. And it starts from the very beginning and deciding what to buy from who, where, right? Sourcing to choosing who you buy from, which finance banks you use, to how you ship, how you inspect it. So there's a lot of different ecosystems. And the holy grail would be to connect them where a customer is in the center.
Yep. Very, very, very interesting there. So, Daniel, what are some of the pros and cons of having interoperable platforms from your perspective?
It depends on who you're asking there, really. But if we take it from the perspective of those actually whose goods it is, who need to be financed, who need to be moved, the pros are obvious, right? The first one is that it is very unlikely that a monolithic organization will be able to solve for all of these challenges. There are very few industries where the entirety of the transaction has been totally solved for by one company. And when that has happened, typically you see some other challenges that come as a consequence of that. And there are plenty of examples in different industries where that has happened, but we don't need to name and shame. So the first thing to note is that it's probably easier in the short term to realize some of the vision of digitization through having interoperability than it would be to wait and see if somebody's going to solve that themselves. So that's the first one, is that there is a greater likelihood of success. The second one is that having a series of competitors who are also able to interoperate with other platforms that offer complementary services, you're likely to get a better overall access to the services that you're looking to consume. So if it's just two platforms or one platform, there's not that much. But when you have the sort of interoperability granted you by the App Store on your phone, the choice that you get, the service that you get, that competition drives for a better user experience and makes for a better environment. So you get something quicker, and the likely product that you're going to get in the medium term is going to be better. The challenge or the cons are, if I send you an email, it's going to work most of the time because, in the early 90s, they established a set, I say they, it's like this group of internet people establish a set of protocols for how emails should work, so that if I send it from I use hey.com, send it to your Gmail or to your work account, we're still going to be able to communicate with each other. That level of standardization is incredibly rare in digitization. And so the con here is that if I want to integrate to another platform, or you have multiple platforms integrating, you either have a situation where you are having to create standards out of nothing, which is something that requires substantial investment and alignment, or alternatively, you're looking to have a set of bespoke integrations for each part of each platform that you're looking to connect to. So the con is that these are challenges that require substantial coordination between parties who may have some complementary elements, some competitive elements, and some totally unrelated elements, and you're still going to have to work together. So it's a coordination problem, and that's the key challenge that I think you face as a result of looking for these interoperable and complementary approaches.
Thanks, Daniel. Josh, I'm going to turn to you. And I think following on from what Daniel said earlier, I think in an ideal world, one magical platform would probably be more efficient than having to use numerous different platforms, i.e. corporates and banks signing up to many different trade finance platforms. Is this not possible in your opinion?
I don't think it's the best possible solution. And no, it's probably not possible either. So I think it's really about specialization. And it's about lowering barriers to entry. So I think there's amazing people doing amazing work out there in various specialization in that sort of 0 to 100 step process of international trade. And the magic is going to be giving a solution to an end user who they don't know that they're using multiple solutions, or maybe they're aware they're using multiple solutions, but it's done in such a seamless way that it feels like they're using one solution. And I think this is where we're heading. Right now people talk about, I have to sign up to both platforms. This is a huge barrier, but you sign up to many things on your iPhone with the click of a button. And maybe that's the future of this as well. We all agree on certain legal standards, et cetera, on what should be appropriate. And you want to receive this letter of credit over this platform, click to agree to these terms and conditions. Here's your username and password. You log in and there it is. The same thing for a shipping platform or a trading platform or what have you. So I think the work that we're doing behind the scenes to give that a seamless user experience where you can use whatever user interface you want. You can connect to whatever networks that are important to you and your business. That's going to be the future. So we do want some amount of specialization. It's not going to be some super platform. And the key is to make sure that the winners of each individual area, so you don't get too much fragmentation, but that you make it seamless in all those other areas that are, as we said, complementary. So that's something that we're starting to work on, and maybe we'll show a little bit later today.
And I just wanted to add on to that is you look at you talk interoperability. There's different components of interoperability, and I've just touched on it a little bit. There's the technological side, right? APIs or blockchains talking, whatever. That's almost in some ways the easy one, right? There's other components. There's the legal side, right? And so each system is going to have their different rule book based on their different specialty area, right? So the legal framework is also something that, how do you interoperate legal frameworks? That's even harder, right? And then the next thing is the commercial side, right? And I think that's something that's a little bit easier. And I think, as these platforms go into production, first they're learning about, how they go commercial themselves, and then how they commercially can collaborate with others, right? But you have commercial, you have legal, and the technical side. All of those have to come together to in different forms and different levels to make it as seamless an experience for customers as possible.
Thanks very much, both. And I really like that the analogy of the Apple, the iOS kind of store or the Android store, and how those apps need to be able to work seamlessly together, although the end user doesn't necessarily realize that they're using a whole suite of different services by different providers. And thanks, Carl, for also, I guess, talking about those three different challenges and barriers. Let's talk about one of them in a bit more detail, and to Daniel's point earlier around the cons of the interoperable platforms, which is standardization. Would standards help accelerate the digitization of trade? And if so, who should be creating these standards? Josh, I'm going to ask this question to you to start off with, and perhaps we can take a look at the Swift messaging types and that current kind of ecosystem we have right now.
Yeah, no, I think standards is really important to scaling. When you look at standards, and Daniel, you mentioned this as well, it's almost impossible to create a brand new standard, not just from the amount of work it takes to create it, but also just the alignment of everyone. So standards, much like trade is all about finding what is the lowest or the highest common denominator that we can all sort of connect on. And right now, if you're looking at trade finance messaging, what is that common denominator is the Swift series of messages. That's the way that bank back office systems are wired. And until volumes change into something else, that's the way they're going to continue to be wired. Which is why for us, rather than create some new standard and make it difficult to integrate, we want to make it as easy as possible to integrate. So it's all about shifting business from a suboptimal process to a more optimal process using that same standard. And then once you're in a more sort of modern technology setting, then that's when you can start to upgrade or update those standards. And I think we're starting to see that. Even UCP from the International Chamber of Commerce, right? There's an electronic version of that, and they revise it to allow for the changing of time. So you don't want to go and create something from scratch. You want to adopt something that's out there, and then you want to work with those bodies to adopt it as technologies change and as ways of working change. But going and blowing something up and starting from scratch, I think would be very hard. And then with the integration piece, I think given that it's going to be this complex web of complementary platforms, if it's a bespoke integration with everyone, then of course it just takes more time, more money, and the business case of doing it is lower. But if it's all standardized, then of course it can be much more cost effective, which means the end user gets access to a bigger ecosystem earlier in the digitization process.
Thanks, Josh. And Daniel, is the same thing happening in the e-bills of lading space or in the shipping space? Can you talk about standards at a high level from your perspective?
Yeah, there's a very old webcomic that went along the lines of there are 14 competing standards, which is ridiculous. So, we'll create a new one. And it's like it's like, okay, so there are 15 competing standards now. And that's the state in container shipping industry. You had a push for digitization in the 90s with the use of EDI technology. So that's electronic data interchange, which is a batch processing. I know it's common in many industries, but it is the backbone of the digital infrastructure within the shipping industry today. And there are emerging standards, but a standard's not a standard if it's not standard. I don't mean to be tautological there, but there's no, if nobody's adopted it or only a subset of people have adopted it, it's not all that useful as a standard. So standards do exist, standards have been defined, but it's the adoption that we think is challenging. There are some standards bodies out there, for example, UN CFAC, which is part of the United Nations, or DCSA, which is founded by some of the ocean carriers that are a part of TradeLens, et cetera, who are looking to digitize documents, processes, schemas, et cetera, within the document space. We welcome and wherever possible are pushing for and are adopting those standards where they are appropriate. But there's a lot of work to go. And get to the same point that Josh was saying there. You know, we could adopt a standard, but if the people who are publishing data to that standard don't adopt it, we're essentially just translating their standards to our standards. And then if our users don't use it as well, then again, we're getting to the same problem here. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're making sure that they're practical. Wherever those standards come on, they're practical implementations. And that's the key point for us here.
Yeah, and I guess the issue is always, you know, it could end up creating more work overall than the natural benefit in the end. Daniel, are there concerns around security and security standards too within the space? The
good news there is that there are security standards that have been around and pretty well adopted. So ISO 27000 standards would be the one that immediately come to mind, which I must say TradeLens has been compliant with for a few years now. And it's important that we put, I think, security standards as number one, security and privacy. At the end of the day, we're talking about companies, we're talking about commercially sensitive information. Those need to be key to what we're doing. And that gets to my point there about practical standards, right? At the end of the day, if you have a situation where you have your data, I have my standards, maybe some of my customers are using those standards, and you're publishing and I'm translating, the challenge there is that you're relying on that interpretation of two standards communicating to each other. That has security problems in the sense that information, it's like any sort of translation, things can be lost in translation, right? So you need to rely on information that comes as a result of that conversion. That's where you see real practical risks. So we just need to be conscious of this. It's not just enough to say we've identified a standard and implemented it. The industry as a whole needs to move forward on that.
Thanks, Daniel. Now, let's discuss interoperability, because I think we touched on it earlier, but I think it would be good to go into a bit more detail on that. And Josh, I guess a question going into a bit more detail on what Carl was talking about earlier. Is it possible for other platforms to interoperate with Contour? And what would be the business rationale? How could it really work? And I guess we could talk about the network effect here.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about. It's about building a network, and it's about building features in your application. It's about driving business value. And I think we talked about this earlier. Imagine if Zoom and Microsoft Teams spent all of their development budget on trying to be interoperable. So one person can dial in Zoom, the other person can dial in Teams, and it would all just work. Well,
by the way,
maybe
Josh,
they would get that to work.
That sounds fantastic, by the way. If we could get WebEx and GoToMeeting as a part of this, I think.
And this is the dangerous part with interoperability. It always sounds fantastic, right? But the work that goes into it behind the scenes would probably stop them from doing a lot of innovation and driving a lot of customer value to their respective markets. And at the end of the day, if I have to use Zoom for one call and Teams in the next, it's not going to impact my life that much compared to having nothing. So that's, I think, what we need to do is, I think a lot of people have been waiting. I remember even back to my banking days and being with some large corporate trading companies, and they know it takes a long time and it's not easy to choose a platform. So they want to choose the right platform, and they want that platform to be around forever and not be, a flavor of the day or a fad. But all of this stops adoption, stops movement. I think you'll need to realize that you're going to need to be a part of multiple platforms. You're going to have a Zoom account and a Teams account in the world that we live in. And I think the more people realize that and sort of sign up and get going, use these things, give feedback, allow them to improve, then we're going to be in a place where interoperability isn't the most important part. It's really about just network building. And then at that point, I think we're so far down the road of trade digitization that we can have different conversations about what makes sense as an industry in terms of consolidation. But focusing on interoperability right now, and we're just trying to do the thing and scale the network, would be a waste of scarce resources, I would say.
And am I also correct in saying that if you were to go down that route, it's not necessarily integrating, it's potentially mirroring statuses, it's parallel processes, it's double data, etc. It's actually quite hard to technically interoperate, right?
Yeah, well, I think Carl mentioned this as well. It's technically hard, and that's the easiest part. So it's just one of these things that I think the more people ask for it, and more people say, I'm waiting until everything's interoperable, I think it hurts the overall adoption. So what we're trying to urge people to do is join our platform, join multiple platforms, try a few of them. Right now, there's opportunities to do that, especially when the platforms are now in full production and you can actually use them for your regular business. And it's not just sort of a proof of concept, which is quite easy to sort of, do quite quickly. I think there's opportunity then to really push these things ahead. It sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that way.
Thank you. And if I may, Trade Finance Global, the World Trade Organization, and the International Chamber of Commerce recently updated our periodic table of projects using blockchain to digitize many areas of trade, which Carl mentioned earlier. And we actually looked at ranking how far into production some of these platforms are. So I think, and I'm sure you guys would agree, it's good for customers and banks to research all of the different platforms, what they do, what their capabilities are, what their silos are, what their limitations are, and ask the right questions. I'm going to ask you a bit later what the kind of most common FAQs are, because I think that'll be important for our audience. But just to kind of round up on this topic, and Carl, is TradeLens and Contour an example of this kind of interoperability? And to your 3 points on the technical, legal, and commercial aspects, how's it working? And please go into as much detail as you can.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great example. For instance, in letter of credit, digitized letter of credit, which is 40 pages of paper that gets shipped around the world and takes weeks to process, to digitize that and do it in an afternoon. It is, the first letter of credit LC you do on Contour is much better than the last one you did on paper, real simple. But that also includes very often a bill of lading, right? And a bill of lading, that transfer of title, is part of that process, right? And it can be, again, if it's domestic, maybe not, but for international, absolutely, right? You need that. And so, partner like TradeLens, who has that ability to transfer title, right? And the ability to sync information so that a customer working on TradeLens, and it's not a customer, it's a group of customers, right? It's two banks and two corporates, right? That are both signed up on both platforms, to be able to share that information, to make it easier because it's also different people using the two systems, right? The CFO is not paying attention to the EBL, right? It's the shipping department, right? They're making sure the transfer of title, and then the bank in between wants to know that transfer of title has come so that they can make their financing decision. So it's different people in the same company. So you talk about a company, just, it's not generic, right? They're different departments of the company and they need different services. So yeah, with TradeLens, and I think we'll show a video later, right? I mean, we're working together to manage that information so it's easier for the company generically or the bank to be able to leverage the data in both these systems. And I mean, EBL is a great example for a letter of credit as a key component to make it completely electronic and smoother.
Thanks for the overview. I mean, look, let's address some of the most frequently asked questions. And given that you guys are in full production, I'd be really interested in asking you what your banks ask you as the most common questions. And up to you, Josh or Carl, whoever wants to take this. But what are the common questions? And I'd like you to answer them as well.
So I'll discuss the sales piece of it. I mean, for the banks, the first question is really security, safety, governance, right? They want to know that they're working with a fintech that they can trust. And from our perspective, we have 9 banks. We're majority owned by the banks. 9 banks have invested into us. You know, we definitely tick that box, right? Because they realize that we're owned by the banks, governance levels fit what a bank is worried about and needs. And whether that's from a management perspective, that's from a technical perspective, security perspective, to run a proof of concept with a bank is easy. To be in production is hard, right? So the banks are really asking, you know, are you at the level that I can trust? Now, and so now we have banks joining, you know, quite, and every couple of weeks we have a new bank joining. That's not one of our original investors, right? And that snowball is beginning to grow. So the first question is governance and security and safety. The second, of course, is and it's the you know, everyone's asking, who else is on the network, right? And who can I partner with? So a bank says, who else is on the network? Right now we have, I guess, in 51 countries, 87 branches from 14 banks as of this morning, are on the platform. And so again, some of the largest banks in the world, Trade Finance Bank, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, BNP, ING, right? So we can sort of say, yeah, you're going to have a counterparty there. And I think Josh mentioned before is, you know, a little bit, this is a journey. If a bank says, I want everyone on board today, or a corporate says, everyone on board today, it's not going to happen, right? It's a journey. You're going to start with a corridor. You're going to start with a certain trading partner and work your way. And I think the key thing is the question is everyone ready yet? No, but you need to start the journey. And whether that's a corporate or a bank, you know, we need to convince them that even if everyone is on, would you automate all your systems tomorrow? No, it's going to be a process. So the earlier you start, the more you learn.
Absolutely. And I guess there's a bit of, I guess there's got to be a lot of bank FOMO, who's on your network, will go when these counterparties go, etc. Josh, are there any, what are the kind of technical questions that people often ask?
I guess everyone asks me for more products. I guess that's the biggest thing, is everyone wants this, okay, you do letters of credit, it's great, we're loving that, but what about guarantees, open accounts, supply chain, receivables finance, which is coming. But I guess the difference is that, you know, with a full production solution, we can't launch these things lightly. So we're really excited that now we have a lab at Contour, so we can start experimenting with these different new products, working with our clients, really defining those requirements well, so that when they get launched into the full production solution, everything works as everyone expects. But I think that's what I get asked the most about, which is good. I think it's a good sign. People want to do more on Contour. In terms of security and technology and things, it's interesting to see how few questions you get about blockchain now compared to 3 years ago. It used to be all about, tell me about your you're using proof of work or proof of stake, or tell me about your different mechanisms of sort of synchronization and data storage and everything else, where I think now everyone's looking for a solution that works, that's safe, that they can trust. We talked about, you know, standards with ISO, which we're going through that process as well. And that is going to be around for a long time as well. So, you know, I think having all of that in place is the most important. Of course, the technology has to be there, but I think it's becoming less important the more sort of mainstream it's becoming. It's now about the user experience and what value can I get by using the platform.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to ask you three questions, and you're only allowed to say yes or no. If people want to know more information, then they can ask you. But okay, so question one: if my supplier is using a different platform, say Marco Polo, does this work?
No. If you're on Zoom and I'm on Teams, we're not going to talk much. Yeah.
Question two: do my clients, so me as a bank, do my clients need to join?
Absolutely. We want you to join Contour as a team, as your network. This is a network process. So at the beginning, I said, where does the value come from in Contour? The value comes from connectivity and synchronization. So if you come by yourself, you have no one to share information with, and you have no one to synchronize with. So you have to come with your network, and that's where the value comes from. It's about that connectivity. You can't have connectivity if there's no one to connect to. So absolutely, we want people to come in, and there's already lots of people to connect to, in the party already. But if not, please feel free to bring in your counterparties, the banks that are important to you, and we'll help to get them all on board.
Okay, that wasn't just a yes or no, but okay. Question three: do both sides need to use the same system?
Yes, as per my last answer.
Great. I think it would be really good if you could show us a quick demo of both kind of the Contour side and the TradeLens side. I think you've got something prepared. Are you able to show us something?
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to show you what it's like to use Contour when there is an integration with TradeLens. So the whole idea here is that you would have a group of companies actually, both the buyer and the seller and the banks, that were participants of both the TradeLens network and the Contour network. And what we're really trying to do here is give the user a comprehensive experience where data is going to actually go in between both platforms, but the user can just log into one system and have one user experience, which we think is the best way to do this. Now, this is just the early days of our experimentation with Contour and TradeLens continuing to work together. We can revise this, so please do give us your feedback. So what you're looking at right now is Contour's homepage. This is when you're the seller. You can see there's a letter of credit, a documentary credit, we call it, and there's a presentation that we're going to go and create. And we're going to show you the process of creating this presentation with the TradeLens electronic bill of lading. So you create the presentation, and now this is attached to a letter of credit. So it's not just by itself, it's always against the letter of credit. And you're going to have to create some documents in this. Cover letter to the bank, you're adding an invoice, which is a PDF. But then we get to the transport document. And the transport document is different than a PDF because it needs to be singular. It needs to provide the title to be transferred from you as the exporter to the receiver, who in this case would be the nominated bank. So it can go on to the issuing bank and then it eventually can go to the buyer so that they can get their goods. Now, in this case, a PDF is not going to work. We need something more. And this is why we want to have this integration with TradeLens. So what we're going to do is select TradeLens as the mode of transfer. The electronic bill of lading does not move from TradeLens to Contour. All we're going to do is communicate with TradeLens as an authenticated party in both platforms that we want to send this electronic bill of lading, where we are the title holder, to the bank as part of this presentation. So now here you're logging in as the bank, and you can go and see that this presentation has been made. You can see it's been now attached to this trade finance process, to this letter of credit, and you can see that now here is the bank, the nominated bank, they are the title holder. So you can accept this presentation. You can even set the payment due date. This is all the letter of credit process that we have. This is actually the issuing bank. Sorry, we just presented directly to the issuing bank. We can see that they can now release the documents to the applicant. It's going to tell you who you're going to transfer it to. And now the applicant, which is the buyer, is going to be able to log into Contour. Here they are as ACE. See that the presentation has been accepted and see that the documents have been released to them. So they can view the invoice. They can view the PDF of the transport document, the electronic bill of lading, and they can see that they are the title holder. And now they have two actions they can do here. They can either surrender the electronic bill of lading, and this means they want to go and pick up their goods at the port, or maybe they need to do some activities. They need to sell the goods on, and the next party's not on TradeLens, so they need to switch the electronic bill of lading to paper, and that instruction you can provide. So this is a bit of our vision
about how two platforms can work together by joining both Contour and TradeLens. And for the users, when you're in the actual process of trade finance, it can be a very seamless experience. So please do get in touch with us and we can share a whole lot more about this. Thanks so much.
You can reach out to us, contact@contour.network, but we're really welcoming everyone, companies of all size, to join the network and experience the future of digital trade.
And Carl, what's next for Contour after letters of credit?
Well, as Josh alluded to, we have no lack of requests to build other products, and we're just going to have to prioritize in this. Our innovation lab is a great place to be able to test and see, what is the experience our clients want, whether they're banks or corporates. What's the experience? How are we going to prioritize with guarantees, standbys, open account? And again, we'll be expanding on that. And as we look at, it'll be looking at products, it'll be looking at corridors, it'll be looking at partners. And so there's all different ways that we'll be expanding as we go along. But it's really starting with building the network and working with the customers to understand what they need. And it's a continuous process, right? And yes, believe me, I ask Josh this question all the time: what's he building next, right? So there's a healthy debate on how quickly he's going to come out with it. But we are looking at building more products onto it as we build a network.
Thanks very much, and I look forward to visiting the Contour lab. I'll bring my goggles and lab coats. Daniel, as for TradeLens, what's next for you guys, both individually and also collaboratively?
Yeah, so individually, what we've been working on to date has been bringing on these ocean shipping lines, ports and terminals, customs, inland providers to ensure that we have that comprehensive network coverage there in place. And what we think we have right now is the world's largest supply chain network with multiple carriers and all these other participants actively participating to ensure that trade can become more efficient. And obviously driving for those data standards and what have you. So we're going to continue building out that network and enhancing our existing product suite, which includes TradeLens Core, supply chain management tool that can improve the ability to collaborate with your supply chain partners, radically improve the visibility in your supply chains by getting the data from all those network members straight into your system in real time, and through digitizing your documentation. We're going to continue to build that out and continue to refine our EBL. The scenarios that we've described so far have supported, but it's always, as Josh says, you can always make it better. And the banking network and the carrier network that we have already on the platform, we're going to continue to build on that. And then over time, the products that we build, in addition to the network that we're growing, will continue to be built out on the platform. So if you want to join the hundreds of ecosystem members we already have on the platform, please feel free to reach out either as a network member, like a bank or a port, or as a customer who wants to buy a better supply chain management set of capabilities or an EBL. Go to our website, tradelens.com, and check it out. Or probably don't talk to me on LinkedIn because I barely ever checked it, but feel free to drop me an email. It'll be great to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And look, I think I'd like to thank all three of you, Carl, Daniel, and Josh, for joining me today here in London from all around the world. We discussed the real myths around interoperability, and I think for sure I'll go away this afternoon and be thinking and pondering about that a lot more. We also discussed the realities of standardization and why it's so important, what it actually needs. And I think for the first time we've seen a real demo of two production companies working in compatibility together in slightly different areas, but really showing how partnership between fintechs really works to add more value than just using those platforms separately. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Thanks for joining us on Trade Finance Talks TV.
Thanks, Deepesh. Thank you, Carl and Josh.
Thank you.